The Russian Federation has 11 time zones end to end. It's the largest country in terms of land surface in the world, and indeed in the history of the world. Only the Soviet Union, its predecessor, was larger. But Russia still comprises 75% of the territory of the old Soviet Union. We tend to look at places like Ukraine and Kazakhstan and say, my gosh, how large, but measured against the bulk of Russia, not so much. Russia is an enormous place, but it's very underpopulated when compared to its geographic size. And this is particularly true east of the Ural Mountains. So the collapse of the Soviet economy led to a depopulation of Siberia east of the Urals, which is to say 2/3 of the Russian Federation's landmass, at the same time that the population of China, which borders most of eastern Siberia, has been skyrocketing, of course, now it's changing. So there were many prognostications back in the day about, would China take Siberia from Russia? Seems a little silly to put it that way now, but people were thinking about this 20 years ago. Well, things have changed, of course, because living standards in Russia were far higher during the collapse of the Soviet Union in the late 80s, early 90s, than they were in neighboring regions of China. Now, arguably, living standards in China are much higher than in Russia. So the incentive for massive amounts of Chinese people to migrate illegally into Russia just don't exist. And yet Moscow needs to maintain the population in eastern Siberia to hang on to these vast territories. So its population and the population of the Russian Federation has fallen steadily ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Demographers could see this happening even in the late Soviet period. The current population is well under 150 million and falling. The TFR is far below replacement levels. So the struggle for the Russians will be to resist the tendency for their population to concentrate in a few big urban centers in European Russia and to maintain their robust demographic presence in the East. They've tried doing that by developing the oil and gas industry, by building large oil and gas pipeline networks, connecting Russia to China, by building other types of transportation infrastructure in Siberia, by building up the ports, by pouring development money into places like Vladivostok, Novosibirsk, etc. But it's a challenge. It's a real challenge. One of the things that's going to help them, obviously, is climate change. Climate change is raising the average temperature in Siberia significantly, and that could lead to a dramatic expansion of Siberian agriculture. Russia is already the largest wheat producer in the world and grain producer overall. It could become an even larger producer of food in the world as climate change makes more and more Russian land available for settlement and for farming. And climate change is also going to, right now, if you look at Russia, the habitable strip of Russia, especially the eastern half, east of the Urals, really hugs the southern border of Russia. This strip is moving northward because of climate change. And the habitable portion of Russia could easily double in size over the course of this next century. And this is a big trend that nobody's looking at right now. But even in European Russia, if one looks at southern Russia, Rostov Oblast, and the areas bordering on the northern Caucasus, growing seasons are increasing. You can get 3 crops now instead of 2. Wheat productivity is going through the roof. Russia is now the largest wheat exporter in the world. It's driven the United States out of its position as the supplier of wheat and other grains to Egypt. The Russian-Egyptian alliance now is largely based on food, on the export of Russian wheat to Egypt, another factor no one's looking at. So many things are happening now because of climate change, population growth. But getting back to population growth, which is what we're talking about today, all these factors are interlinked, of course. One of the major constraints on Russian foreign policy is the size of its military. There's only a certain population of military-age males and females that can be recruited into the Russian military. And Russia has moved more and more toward a volunteer model for its army and away from drafting people into military service. More and more of the Russian military now consists of kontraktniki, people who sign contracts for military service as opposed to being drafted. This shift has been important in fueling the shift of the Russian military strategy away from low-tech to high-tech weaponry and tactics, associated tactics. So what's happening now with Russia is they need a steady supply of high-quality military-age manpower, and the demographic decline is making it harder and harder to convince to find enough recruits for the army, essentially. This fact is exacerbated by the fact that Russia is a vast territory, and most of the Russian military has to be deployed internally in order to maintain internal order and stability. So Russia's available troops for foreign military adventures are rather limited. I mean, this is why all Russian military adventures over the last 10, 15 years have involved very limited numbers of troops. The maximum size of the Russian contingent in Syria at any one time was about 15,000. In Libya, they had at most a few thousand. That number has fallen. There are really no other significant Russian military deployments outside the borders of the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union. And this fact is driven largely by demographics. So to sum it up, Russia's population is shrinking rapidly due to its low TFR. This has reduced the pool of military recruits, potential military recruits. Russia's vast size means that most of its, and its internal political problems, mean that most of its army has to be deployed internally in order to maintain stability in the country. And this means that it just can't afford to send large numbers of military forces on foreign invasions or foreign military adventures. And this is why, since the fall of the Soviet Union, it hasn't done so. It can't afford to demographically.